All right. So how did you find the Krishna consciousness movement, and at what age were you?
Okay, well, Haribol, I was brought up an atheist, so God didn't come into my life as a child, as a young person growing up, until my early teens, when I started to think that there must be a God. I started to question the idea of atheism. And I prayed to God. When I was 16, I did a very sincere prayer, which is difficult to do for an atheist. If you've been an atheist, you're kind of not familiar with prayer at all. But I prayed sincerely from my little teenage heart and I said to God, if you exist, God, you must know that I exist. If you exist, you must know me. So if you exist, please make me know you. And that was my prayer. 7 years later, that prayer was answered when I came across the teachings of Srila Prabhupada in the Bhagavad Gita. At that time I was 23, and that was in 1974, early 1974. And I was living up in the hills on the Coromandel Peninsula in New Zealand, miles from anywhere. Of course, this was the tail end of the hippie era, the flower power era, which it tends to have a bad reputation. It tends to be known as the age of loose morals, sex, drugs, rock and roll, etc. And certainly it was. But at the same time, it was a sort of an enlightenment. It was a sort of an awakening for many people. Awakening to the fact that we have just been schooled into thinking a certain way, being a certain way, mindlessly coerced into a certain civilization, which we suddenly realized we had a choice whether to be like that or not. And it was also a time when we started to question that there might be more than what we could perceive with our senses. And so here I was living in this, it wasn't exactly a hippie community, it was just a group of young people who were hippie-like, living in the hills, growing their own vegetables, living very, very simply. And the person who became my Vatma Pradarshak Guru, whose name in those days was Barry Jennings, he later became Balaram Das. He was travelling around New Zealand with Srila Prabhupada's books, and he was telling people about Krishna consciousness. And wherever he went, wherever he met groups of people, he would engage them in kirtan, and he would preach to them, tell them about Srila Prabhupada and Krishna and Lord Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, and how we can have a relationship with him, which is our natural function, our natural eternal position. So by some wonderful fortune, this person came up to this homestead where we all lived and engaged us in kirtan. I remember we sat around a fire in the evenings, and he led the kirtan. We all joined in. Most were high on marijuana, but that didn't matter. It was still the holy name. And he talked to us and told us about Krishna and told us, he read from Krishna book, and he read the story of Durva the gorilla, which was an interesting first pastime of Lord Krishna to hear about. It sounded, quite violent, ripping up trees from the ground and bashing each other, throwing huge rocks at each other and everything. It was like, wow, this Krishna. Actually, that was about Lord Balaram, wasn't it? But still, Balaram was Krishna's brother. The whole thing sounded unique. And I myself, although I was fascinated, I didn't really take to it. I didn't feel gravitated towards it for myself, but the person I was with, who later became my husband, who lived there also, was interested. And he was the one who really listened with his inner ear to what Balaram Das, Barry Jennings in those days, was saying. And lo and behold, he got himself some beads and he started to pray the holy name, 16 rounds a day, just off like that, straight away. And because I was attached to him, I thought, now if I don't keep up with this, I'm going to be left behind. So I got myself some beads too and started to chant 16 rounds straight away. And then some months later, we heard that Srila Prabhupada was coming to Australia. And so we quickly went and worked for 3 weeks at a kiwi fruit orchard and picked and packed kiwi fruit and made our fares to New Zealand. Made our fares over to Melbourne, Australia. And there we met Srila Prabhupada. So that was 1974. And we arrived at the temple, which was in a street called Burnett Street in the suburb of St Kilda in Melbourne. It was a very old part of St Kilda. In fact, I think St Kilda is a very old suburb. And the temple was a terraced house, just in a row of terraced houses, just very, very old. Even the toilet was not inside. It was in a little outhouse out the back. And we moved in there. We moved in there with dozens of other devotees, brahmacharis and brahmacharinis in that temple. And the place was just a hive of activity because Srila Prabhupada was coming in about 3 or 4 days. And not only was Srila Prabhupada coming, and there was an immense amount to be prepared and done to prepare for his arrival and his visit, but also there was the Rath Yatra festival that was going to be happening. I think this was the second or maybe the third big Rath Yatra festival that had been held in Melbourne, because the 3 chariots of Balaram, Jagannath and Subhadra had already been built, but they needed to be repainted. They needed to be reassembled and repainted and everything made fresh and sparkling. And new canopies were being made for the chariots and new flags, and all sorts of projects were being done. The house where Srila Prabhupada was to stay was being thoroughly cleaned and freshly painted, and fresh curtains put up and all sorts of things. So we became in the thick of all this. And I was put with the girls in a room in Little Lonsdale Street. This was the service that I was given, was in a storefront in Little Lonsdale Street, where the devotees had this little facility, which was like their downtown centre. And I remember being down there with about 6 or 7 other young women, and we were in this room in this little storefront, and there were about half a dozen sewing machines. There was absolutely no furniture, so the sewing machines were on the floor, and or some of them may have been on boxes or something. And we were sewing under the direction of the head lady, Vaibhavi Dasi. She was the wife of the temple president, Charu Das. And we were making clothes for the deities, we were sewing new curtains for the altar, we were making canopies for the chariots. I was given the job of making the little covers for the fiberglass horses, for the rathas. And there was a massive amount of sewing to do, and there was so much cloth in the room, all these girls with their different projects. And the hours went by. It was nighttime. We had not an hour to lose because there was so much to be done, and like the hours before Srila Prabhupada arrived were getting fewer and fewer. And I remember it was 11 o'clock at night, and we were starting to sort of fade with our service. And Vaibhavi said, "Don't space out, Prabhus." In those days, the ladies all called each other Prabhu, which is actually, we know it's a masculine term, but Srila Prabhupada apparently addressed his lady disciples as Prabhu sometimes. So that was the habit in those days, which somehow died out. But so that was funny. She said, "Don't space out, Prabhus." But before too long, eventually, one by one, we all just fell asleep right there on the floor amongst our heaps of cloth and sewing, and slept for a few hours until it was time to get up in the morning. Then we just immediately got into our sewing again. At that little Lonsdale Street, the food, prasadam, would be served for all the devotees who were doing Sankirtan, book distribution in the city, and Nagar Sankirtan every day, and even working on the chariots. The yard where the rathas were being reassembled and painted was closer to the city than the temple. So the devotees they were sleeping on the chariots, on the rathas, and doing their painting work day and night. And they would come into this little Lonsdale Street centre to have their prasadam 2 or 3 times a day. And so I think the prasadam was being cooked at the temple, but it would be transported into Little Lonsdale Street. And I remember sitting on the floor and being given a round stainless steel plate, and somebody walked along with a bucket of something and gave me a dollop of it on the plate. And that was all there was. It was just a dollop of this lovely looking yellow stuff, and it was so fragrant. And I tasted it, and it was so heavenly. It was the nicest savoury meal I'd ever had. I found out later, of course, that it was kitchery, regular old kitchery. And I tell you, I relished that kitchery. And so that was one of my first memories of leading up to Srila Prabhupada's visit. And then came the time for him to arrive. I don't remember the date, but it was it was July, I think. Pretty sure it was the middle of winter. It was July 1974, and we all jumped into combi vans that the temple owned. I don't know how many, at least 3 or 4 combi vans, I think, which were, I don't think we use that term these days, combi vans. Anyway, they were just vans. There were no seats in these vans. We all just used to pack in like sardines into these vans. And of course, there were no seatbelt laws or passenger limits in those days either, or at least if there were, the devotees didn't follow them. So we went out to the airport, and Prabhupada was due to arrive any minute, and we were all doing kirtan around the door out through which the incoming passengers would come. And of course, in those days, the society, the Iskcon society was very male dominated, and girls were not really given much of a space. That girls were always marginalized and pushed to the back. So the men were jumping, and they were all young men, late teens, early 20s, shiny bald heads and saffron clothes and big bold tilak, and beating their mridangas and jumping and beating their big whopper kartals, and uproariously chanting the holy name, and we're, expecting Srila Prabhupada to come through the door any minute. Now, the astonishing thing that happened was that these young men and in their kirtan were surrounding the door through which Srila Prabhupada was expected to come, but Srila Prabhupada unexpectedly came through another door nearby, right beside where the ladies were standing in their kirtan. And there he was. Of course, all I'd seen at that time, were pictures of Srila Prabhupada. And there was no comparison to a picture seeing Srila Prabhupada in real life. He was magnificent, magnificently beautiful and glowing. And there he was, just in our midst, all of a sudden. And the first thing, I didn't bow down initially. It was just, looking at him. And then everyone fell to the floor. The men suddenly realized, see, the Srila Prabhupada's behind us amongst the women. And everybody fell down onto the floor, paid obeisance. And after that, very quickly, he was surrounded by the men, and the kirtan continued, and Srila Prabhupada was led out to where his parked car was waiting, which happened to be a Rolls Royce. Of course, I didn't notice that it was a Rolls Royce. I don't have an eye for vehicles. I never have had. But the heading in the Melbourne newspaper the next day, or maybe that afternoon or evening, was "Swami comes rollsing in." So it was seeing that headline that I understood that, okay, the car was a Rolls Royce, that's nice. The devotees had hired that vehicle for him. And apparently some of the reporters, because we were actually before Srila Prabhupada was led to his car, he was ushered into a press room. And all the devotees went in there too. Somehow or other, 80 devotees packed into this press room. And reporters asked him questions. Oh, the questions were so silly, such silly. Well, why do you wear that stuff on your forehead? And why do you all wear Indian clothes? And all sorts of silly things. Nothing profound. And one of them said, we noticed that your car is a Rolls Royce. If you are propagating simplicity in spiritual life, why do you travel in a Rolls Royce? And Srila Prabhupada gave the answer that the spiritual master should be offered a diamond-studded car by his disciples. So, okay, they accepted that. So then we jumped into our combi vans after Srila Prabhupada had been taken to his car, and we zoomed back to the temple at St Kilda, and many of us were there waiting for him when he arrived. Of course, and many decades later, I learned that you're not supposed to go ahead of your spiritual master. He is the one that goes ahead and the disciples follow. But I don't think there was any awareness of that in those days, and we wanted to make sure the temple was open and everything was prepared and ready for him when he arrived. So he got out of the car. There we were on the street doing kirtan when he arrived, and he walked into the temple surrounded by the devotees doing kirtan. And he walked into the little temple room, which was just an average-sized house lounge room. And his Vyasasana was there, which had been made for him. Beautiful, opulent, decorated Vyasasana. And he sat up on it, and we all crowded into that room. Once again, I think there must be some mystic thing at play in incidences like that, because how did so many devotees get into that small little room? I don't know, but we were all in there. It was all the devotees of the Australia-New Zealand zone, which was around 80 in total, and except for a skeleton crew who had stayed back at the various temples to look after the deities in those temples. Everyone else had come to Melbourne to see Srila Prabhupada. And so there we all were, and by great fortune I was able to find myself about hardly 2 meters from Srila Prabhupada. I was very close to the Vyasasana. And the deity curtains opened, and there was Sri Radha Vallabha, and frankincense came wafting out, thick, heavy frankincense, beautiful fragrance filled the room, and some music played. I can't remember what the music was that was played. Was it the Govardhana prayers? I can't remember. But anyway, before too long, Srila Prabhupada, with a microphone in front of him, started to sing Jai Radha Madhava. And that was an amazing experience, just watching, being so close to Srila Prabhupada and seeing how he deftly played his kartals and sang Jai Radha Madhava. Of course, I'd never heard the song. I'd been with the devotees a week, and I'd never heard this song. And so the first time I heard it was from the lips of Srila Prabhupada. And the way he sang it as he looked at the deity, who, by the way, his name was Ballabha, Radha Ballabha. And that was such an amazing experience. And so after that, he stayed for a week. And in that time was the Rath Yatra festival. And the day of the Rath Yatra festival was, we were all so young, and we had so much energy, and we could do without sleep, and we could just keep serving and serving and serving and missing meals, and we just kept going. Such was the enthusiasm that Srila Prabhupada instilled in us. And I picked up on it very readily, being in that atmosphere. It was so exciting and thrilling, and it had so much meaning. It felt meaningful. And so the Rath Yatra festival began downtown Melbourne, and the 3 chariots were there. Jagannath's leading the way, then Balaram's in the middle, and Subhadra's at the end of the procession. And devotees had different services as wheel guards and pujaris on the different chariots. But the majority of course, many were also pulling the ropes of the chariots. But a majority of the devotees were right up the front of the procession in kirtan, and actually leading the procession in front of Jagannath's chariot was a huge statue of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on wheels, a big, very big fiberglass statue of him dressed beautifully in saffron dhoti and saffron chadar, and I was in. I think I was pulling the ropes, because I've been told, you have to pull the rope. So I was pulling the rope of Jagannath's chariot, and then I was aware that the main kirtan was a few meters up ahead, and so I thought, I'll go up there. Why don't I go up there and be in the middle of that kirtan? So I always think it must have been Super Soul directing me to do that, because I hadn't been in that kirtan very long, and of course I didn't know where or when Srila Prabhupada was going to come. I didn't even really know what his role in the festival was going to be. But I'd been in this kirtan, some of the well-known devotees like Madhurisa Maharaj, who was the leader of the Australian devotees, and Buddhimanta Prabhu, the big book distributor, was there. And Sabhapati Prabhu, who started the new Govardhana community, and many other of the big devotees, the leaders, they were all there in that kirtan. And so I joined in amongst them. There were a few other ladies there too. I remember Subha Lakshmi was there. She was a well-known book distributor, as was Raja Lakshmi and Ramaniya Dasi, all these devotees who'd only been around about hardly a year or two longer than me, and before too long, I suddenly saw there was a car parked at the side of the road as we were moving along the city streets of Melbourne. Hundreds of people on the sides of the roads watching, and all of a sudden there was this car on the side of the road parked, and the door opened, and out stepped Srila Prabhupada. And he came straight over and he joined that kirtan party at the front of the parade. And so I had that fortune of dancing beside Srila Prabhupada, not more than 1.5 meters or 2 meters from him at any one time, for the rest of the procession until the festival procession ended up at a huge stadium somewhere. I don't know where it was, somewhere that had been planned that the chariots would be pulled into, and all the crowds would come in and Srila Prabhupada would address them. So we were on their way there. I didn't know that. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was just there in the kirtan, and now Srila Prabhupada was with us. And I danced beside Srila Prabhupada for, it seemed like a timeless period. It was like in the presence of a pure devotee. You can become lifted out of the realm of time, and it almost seemed like that, because at the time it seemed like I'd just been there for an eternity dancing in that kirtan with Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, he was dancing, no doubt. He had his hands in the air sometimes, and he was swaying, and at the same time walking along. And every now and then he would turn around and look behind him and look up at the giant statue of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu being pulled along. And then he would turn around and keep walking again. And at the end of that parade, that Rath Yatra festival experience, I knew that I was a Hare Krishna devotee for life. It was like, before that I didn't really know. I thought, this is just some fascinating thing I'm coming to. It sounds good. Yeah, I'm probably gonna. I've taken up the process of being with the holy name, and I love this praying on beads. That's kind of unique. But I didn't realize how encompassing it was going to be on my life, how absorbing it was going to be. But after dancing in that procession with Srila Prabhupada, I realized, oh, I'll never be leaving this. That year, 1974, was the coldest winter Melbourne had experienced for 50 years. So it was freezing. And I remember feeling cold, but the cold didn't bother me. Of course, cold doesn't usually bother young people. And we were so fully engaged and active that I think the cold was like a non-issue. Srila Prabhupada, in all the photos, you can see he's rugged up. He's got several chaddars on around his shoulders and neck and over his head sometimes. And so I was fortunate enough to spend 3 full weeks with him. Of course, that is only minuscule compared to what some of my godbrothers and godsisters spent with him, but it's more than what many did also. And it was 1 week in 1974, 1 week in 1975, and 1 week in 1976. He came back to Melbourne for those 3 consecutive years, for a week each time. And it's interesting that incident that I described at the airport, when the devotee men were all expecting him to come out one door, and they were doing kirtan around the door, and he came out, Srila Prabhupada came out another door right beside the ladies. That happened all 3 times we met him. It was just amazing. It happened each time. And I tend to think it was Srila Prabhupada showing the ladies that he loved us and saw us equally with the men. It was his way of showing his appreciation for us. And so I was fortunate to go on 6 morning walks with him. He would go for a morning walk every morning to the Melbourne Botanical Gardens, which are very, very beautiful. And the way that the temple authorities had organized it was that all the different devotees were divided into different seva groups. There was the seva group of the kitchen crew or the cooks, and there was the seva group of the pujaris and the deity worship people, and there were the book distributors, and I can't remember what other departments there were, but there were various departments of seva, and we were divided into groups. And each time Srila Prabhupada came, each of those 3 years, I fitted into 2 of those groups. So I got into 2 to go to because each morning walk, devotees from 1 or 2 of those seva groups would get to go with him on the walks, and I fitted into 2 each time. So I got to go on 2 morning walks with him each of the 3 times he came, which was a total of 6 times. And we would walk through the botanical gardens in the cool, cold crisp of that Melbourne winter morning, and walk in this beautiful atmosphere, which was like walking through the heavenly planets in winter, I guess. And Srila Prabhupada, everyone would just softly chant japa, and sometimes Srila Prabhupada would stop and comment on something, some aspect of nature or something that he saw on his path as we walked along. And then there was the time at the La Trobe University, which turned out to be a really unpleasant experience. Srila Prabhupada was on the stage. The devotees had arranged this. It had been arranged with the university. Srila Prabhupada was on the stage in their big auditorium hall of the university, and quite a few hundred students were there, and all the devotees were there. Some of them were on stage with Srila Prabhupada, sitting around him on this big vyasasana that they carried onto the stage for him. And he was giving a talk. He started to give a talk to these students. And he'd only been talking for, I don't know, not very long, maybe 5 minutes, when one student stood up and started to yell some abuse, some insults towards what Srila Prabhupada was saying. And I remember Srila Prabhupada had been speaking so beautifully and so humbly and so purely. And when this person stood up and yelled, whatever he yelled, I can't remember what it was, he hung his head like that. He just looked down. And Madhavisa Maharaj then stepped up with the microphone and kind of tried to smooth the situation over, but it tended to just make it worse. More and more students joined in with the verbal attacks. And then, and I'm actually not sure of the details, but some of the older devotees may still, who were more involved, especially those hot-headed brahmacharis, they got involved in a physical tussle with some of the students, and it actually got a bit violent in one area. So it was quickly realized that Srila Prabhupada had to be taken out of there. So they somehow whisked him out the back door or somewhere quickly. They got him out of the building and to his car, and we all us devotees ran back to our vans and jumped in. And as we were driving out, things were thrown at our vans. They threw stuff. We could hear banging on the outside of our vans. Paint was thrown over the vehicles, and it was a really, really unpleasant experience. And everyone was quite shaken after it. So that's been quite well documented. The talk, I think, was all recorded on camera. And Srila Prabhupada's talk was recorded and everything. But there was a question into how did that happen? Why was it not checked out more clearly what sort of audience was going to be there, etc. Anyway, we soon recovered. Srila Prabhupada helped us quickly recover from that. He was in fine, perfect, unmoved form just within a couple of hours later when we saw him and he gave us a talk. Srila Prabhupada had been talking publicly. I'm not sure if it was at that event at the La Trobe University or some other event when people outside of the Bhakti community were listening, some reporters, and Srila Prabhupada had talked about how we take a birth according to our consciousness, and if we live like an animal, well then we could possibly come back. It's possible for us to come back as an animal. Anyway, in the newspaper, one day there was a write-up saying, Swami says he is coming back as an animal. So we thought it was horrific. The devotees thought, we've got to hide this from Srila Prabhupada. And, but it wasn't hidden from Srila Prabhupada. He saw it. And Srila Prabhupada laughed. That's why I laughed then, because Srila Prabhupada saw it as funny. So although we didn't initially see it as funny, we saw it as very offensive. But Srila Prabhupada laughed. So, yeah, so in retrospect, I can look back and see the funny side of it too. During his second visit that I experienced, which was in 1975, in May, he came in May that year, and that was the year I took Harinam initiation. And that was, by this time, the devotees had moved the deities from the little terraced house temple in Burnett Street to the new temple that had been purchased in, I think it was Albert Park. I think it's the name of the suburb, Albert Park, Dank Street, Albert Park, which had been an old Catholic boys' school. So it had dormitories, it had a huge assembly hall, which was made into a beautiful temple. They'd laid a marble floor and painted it in beautiful colours, and Srila Prabhupada's beautiful Vyasasana was placed in there, and a wonderful altar was made for the deities with the beautiful ornate peacock doors, and 3 altars, of course, with Govardhana, who were new deities, and Jagannath, Subhadra, Balaram, and with Sri Sri Radha Ballabha in the middle, the central altar. And that year, 1975, Srila Prabhupada, there were two major events. The installation of Sri Sri Gauranitai by Srila Prabhupada. He went on the altar and did the whole Pran Prashishta ceremony with bathing them and installing them while we all watched. Kirtan was happening in the beautiful large temple room, and we were all able to watch this. And of course then there was the Harinam initiation, whereby 24 young people were initiated. There were 19 men and 5 girls, and I was one of the girls. That year, the devotees, some of the devotees, had been to the Holy Dham, Sri Dham Mayapur, for Gaur Purnima. And I don't know how it happened. I never heard it happen since, but the names that we had been given, all the 24 initiates, 24 new Australian initiates, had been given their names in Mayapur. But by this time, the movement had become so big that Srila Prabhupada didn't always pick new initiates' personal names. He assigned his secretary or one of his servants to do that. And it seemed that it was his servant at the time, Pushta Krishna Das, or maybe it was Pushta Krishna Maharaj, I think he was actually a Maharaj, had chosen our names. And the name that I had been given was Bhadrakali Dasi. And all these names had somehow been announced, or they had leaked out anyway to the Australian devotees who were visiting the Dham at that time, that year, and they heard our names. They came to know all the names of all the new initiates. So when they came back to Australia, when they came home, we who had not visited the Dham, found out what our names were to be when Srila Prabhupada was coming in a couple of months' time. So I found out that I was to be Bhadrakali Dasi, and I was prepared to accept whatever name I was given. And at the same time, I did kind of think, I wonder if that name suits me. I'd kind of come to understand that Bhadrakali was kind of a fierce personage of Durga. And but anyway, that was fine. Everyone was calling me Bhadrakali, and we were all calling each other by our new names. And then Srila Prabhupada came. This was the second time that I saw him, the second visit. And during the initiation ceremony, all the men were called up first. All 19 men were called up one at a time. They would pay their obeisances at Srila Prabhupada's feet. That they would stand up, and Srila Prabhupada would say, what are the 4 rules? And they would say, no meat eating, no gambling, no intoxication, and no illicit sex. And then Srila Prabhupada would say, and how many rounds do you chant? And they would say, 16 rounds a day. And then Srila Prabhupada would hand them their beads, their new beads on which he had chanted, and they'd pay their obeisances, and then he'd give them their name, of course. Your name is such and such. And then they would sit down. So this happened, for the 19 men, and then 3 of the ladies went up, and I remember I was the second to last lady to go up, to be called up, because we were all called up by our civilian names. And so I was called up, and as I was paying my obeisances, because I had actually, while I'd been watching all the others go up, I saw that Pushta Krishna Maharaj, who was standing beside Srila Prabhupada, would whisper, tell him in a low voice what the name of this new initiate was to be. So Srila Prabhupada knew what it was. And then, so when I was paying my obeisances, I heard Pushta Krishna Maharaj say to Prabhupada, this is Bhadrakali Dasi. And then I heard, as I was standing up, Srila Prabhupada looked at me and he said, this name should be changed. And I just kind of stood there, and he was looking at me, and I was looking at him, and we were looking into each other's eyes. And that was one of the most amazing moments of my life, to be looking into Srila Prabhupada's eyes. His eyes were oceans, deep, deep oceans of love and compassion. And just like everybody says, or everyone who experienced it, that I felt totally naked in front of Prabhupada. There was nothing that I could hide. And his eyes were so full of love, warmth, and unconditional love. And then he said to me, Bhagdadasi. So that was my name, and then I received my beads and paid my obeisances and sat down. So it was well known that Srila Prabhupada wanted the devotees to develop farming communities. He wanted us to really put into practice the simple Vedic system of simple living and high thinking, was the way he put it. Living on the land, depending on just the land and the cows, and growing our own food, and minimizing dependency on the modern civilization. That was what he had hoped that the devotees would establish. And so one of the devotees, my godbrother Sapabadi Das, was very proactive in finding some land to purchase. And he found this large acreage in the outskirts of Murwillumbah, northern New South Wales, Ewan-Gella to be exact. And he made the arrangements to purchase it, as he has described in his broadcast. And because he had been travelling, he had led a party of brahmacharis around Australia for the whole previous year prior to the purchase of New Govardhana. And my husband-to-be, with whom I had been partnered before, as I joined the temple, because we had become separated because we were not married. I'd become a brahmacharini and he had become a brahmachari. And he, my former partner, was one of the brahmacharis on the bus that toured with Sababadi all around Australia. And it was coming at the end of that period of the bus touring that Sababadi found and arranged for the purchase of the property at Murwillumbah, which became New Govardhana. And because my former husband, he became my husband and then he became my former husband, he was one of the brahmacharis on the bus, and because of that he got to be one of the pioneers. He was invited to, it was understood that Sababadi got all his men from the bus to come and live there and help him pioneer on the land. So by this time, round about this time, we got married. His name was Narayan Das, and he was also initiated at the same yagya that I was initiated. He was among the 19 men that took initiation at that time. And so we got married, and because he was married, I went there too. I was one of the pioneers, and there were only two other ladies there. One of them was Jagat Priya Dasi. She was the wife of Mahotsa Das. And we were leaving Melbourne and coming up to join our husbands at this new farming community in northern New South Wales. So in those days, somehow or other, it came about that our cheating propensities became activated. I mean, cheating propensity is one of the weaknesses of the conditioned souls, right? So, unfortunately, in our neophyte enthusiasm, we sometimes employed, or maybe too often, employed our cheating propensity in the service of Krishna. So Jagat Priya Dasi and I were the first two ladies to live at New Govardhana because our husbands were there, Narayan Das and Mahotsa Das. And we were coming up from Melbourne. We caught a train up from Melbourne to join our husbands at this newly acquired farming community. And in those days, devotees used to think it was okay to employ their cheating propensity in the service of Krishna. And we decided we would cheat the ticket officer at the train station that we were 16-year-olds so that we could get half-price tickets. And although she was 28 and I was 26, we managed to fool them and purchase these tickets of 16-year-olds and get half-price tickets up to, I can't remember whether we landed in Brisbane or where. Anyway, some train station not far from Murwillumbah we disembarked at, and we arrived at New Govardhana. Now, I just want to make it clear that I don't agree with that kind of activity today. I think it was wrong and misguided, because it's very well known, in fact, that to become pure in bhakti, one has to be thoroughly honest and completely curb one's propensity to cheat. So, but we didn't know that. It was a neophyte understanding that everything was Krishna's, and whatever you could take for his service, or however you could rip anyone off or get away with something cheaper than it should be, that was okay, because we were serving Krishna. So I don't agree with that stance anymore. I think that I know that we should be thoroughly upfront and honest in everything we do. Anyway, that was the old days. That was an emblem of the old days, you could say. And we moved on to New Govardhana, and in those days there was no bridge across the river. We used to, when the water was low enough and we had a big enough vehicle, like a four-wheel drive vehicle, we could drive across the river. But of course regular vehicles could not do that. Any regular vehicles that came onto the property had to drive down the road further and come through the neighbour's property. And that neighbour actually wasn't very friendly and didn't like us much. So that was not a comfortable situation to be driving through his land to get onto the farm. Mostly we tried to use the limited one or two four-wheel drive vehicles that we had to just access and exit by driving across the creek, the stony riverbed. And so there was no electricity. The only building on the farm was the White House, which I think was known as the White House for many years. And today it's the centre of the community where the Woofer community is, or something, I believe. But in those days there was no other building on the property, except for a ruin over the hill, which has long been dismantled. And at that White House, it was still reasonably functional, but there was no electricity, so that meant there was no hot water. And we moved onto the farm around about April, May, so just at the beginning of winter. And the men, the brahmacharis and the men, lived inside the house. I think they lived under the house. The sleeping part was underneath the house, and upstairs in the house there was the kitchen, and then there was the lounge room, which became the altar room and the temple room, and there was a small bedroom, which wasn't a bedroom. It was meant to be a bedroom, but it was used as the room where the ladies would do their japa in the morning. The Gauratai deities who had travelled around Australia on the bus, who I believe are still on the altar today at New Govardhana, they became the main deities, or they're the only deities, on the little altar in the lounge room of the White House, our first little temple at New Govardhana. And we would rise every morning for Mangalarti, of course, never thought of missing that. And the men lived, as I said, underneath the house, and the ladies lived, the two of us, Jagat Priya and I, we lived out in tents out the back in the grass, and it was a long overgrown paddock. So we pitched our little tents, and because of the long overgrown grass, it made a padding, so it was soft enough for us to sleep on, because we didn't have beds, of course. We'd never slept in bed the whole time we'd been devotees. And now we were sleeping on the floor of tents with this nice soft padding of grass underneath us. And so the men would use the bathroom. It was only cold water. They had a shower there, and they would rise in the morning at 3:30 a.m. and have their cold shower. And us ladies would, because we couldn't use the same bathroom as the men, so we carried a plastic bucket, 10-litre bucket, full of water out to our tent the night before. And we'd rise in the morning, 3:30 a.m, and we'd go out, just step outside, we'd brush our teeth in the long grass in the pitch dark, and we would have a little cup in our bucket of water, and we'd scoop the water over our bodies. And sometimes it was winter, and on the coldest mornings we would crack a film of ice on those buckets of water which had set overnight. We'd crack that and be bathing in ice cold water. So then we'd get dressed somehow in the dark outside our tents and go into the temple for Mangalati. So that was the way we lived. And it was very, very, very cold. And because as people who live here know that the climate is a very hot climate generally, but early morning, pre-dawn in winter, especially if you're in the hills, in the mountains as we were at New Govardhana, it's cold. And so our bodies would be freezing cold while we were sitting in that little room doing our japa. But we weren't miserable. We were fired up and we were happy. We were content. We were content with whatever came. And the ladies were certainly marginalised, and yet somehow or other we took it. Now, I think that, I've got a lot of, this is a big subject which we're not going to go into here, but why did the ladies take so much demeaning and kind of second place position? I understand the reason why I did, and maybe everyone's got their own separate story. But anyway, I was okay with it. I thought that the woman was a lower birth and you just had to tolerate it, you just had to like it, So we sat there in the freezing cold, and then actually another lady had joined us, another husband and wife had joined the community, and they brought their own tent and lived in that as well. They came a little bit later, a few weeks later. They were Yugatita and Sati. And Sati was heavily pregnant, and so she was living the same way as we all were, and she and Jagatpriya and I would be in this little room in the house, freezing cold, doing our japa, and Yugatita, Sati's husband, decided to buy a rather large, cumbersome oil heater for the ladies in their room because it was cold, for us so that it wouldn't be so bitterly cold because our bodies had cooled down from our ice cold bath, and so we wouldn't warm up until the sun rose. And when the sun rose, of course, it would be lovely and warm, everything would warm up, but those quite a good number of hours after Mangalati, before the sunrise, then we would be cold. So he got this heater and he brought it into the woman's chanting room. And one of the brahmacharis came in and said, the first morning we were in our room with the heater. One of the brahmacharis came in and said, that heater should be in this room for the deities. So Yugatita, Sati's husband, thought, well, okay, well, I'll follow this devotee's recommendation. I'll follow this devotee's order, and he took the heater into the main room where the men were all doing their japa, and he said, "Come on, ladies, come in." So we all came in. The three of us came into the temple room where all the men were doing their japa, and that wasn't comfortable because we knew we weren't wanted there. But anyway, such were the old days. I think we eventually got the heater back. I think we got it back. But, and before too long, after I got married there, I had my fire yagya there and formally got married. I had my registry office marriage down in Melbourne, but I had my fire sacrifice in that White House, in that temple room at the White House. And after that, the grihastas were kindly given, the old ruin over the hill, which had no external doors, and birds used to fly through, and it was covered in bird stool. We cleaned all that up, and we made the place livable. There was no electricity, no hot water. In fact, I think there was no water at all, but we got, actually, I think there was a tank, a rainwater tank out the back. But we got a califont, which is a type of heater that works on, it's a water heater that works on gas. People have them in their caravans, and you turn it on, the gas lights up and the water heats up and hot water comes out, and you can regulate it with hot and cold. So we got one of those outside. It was positioned on some platform out the back, and it was out there that we could have warm baths on the cold mornings. So, but there was no bathroom, and when anyone was having a bath outside, we would have to sing. We would have to sing the holy name loudly so that anyone would say, there would be no one. Don't come out right now, somebody having a bath. So, and then when there was no one singing, then you could go out and have your bath and sing yourself. So during the 2 years that I spent at New Govardhana, which was 1977 and 1978, I got pregnant and had my first baby, my son, Govardhana Pandit. He was born on Govardhana Pandit's appearance day in 1978. And when I was 3 months pregnant with him, the news came that Srila Prabhupada had left the world. And that, of course, was quite a devastating shock that we all had to get used to. And then came the zonal Acharya period, at the beginning of which, around about the end of 1978, my former husband had some clashes with the management in New Govardhana, and we left that community. He and I and our baby left that community and came back to our home, which was across the Tasman in New Zealand, where a farm of 100 hectares had also just been purchased. So we pioneered there as well. The pioneering there wasn't quite as rough as it had been, or quite as simple or austere as it had been at New Govardhana, because at least there was electricity, and that we lived in caravans. We had each devotee had a caravan each, and there was a warm shower in the cowshed, like a shower room with a warm shower, which was used by both men and women. And so we pioneered and built that place up. I was living there for about 13 years until 1979, 1989. And at that time, we decided it was time to, my husband and I, and other people were doing this too, we were branching out, moving out of the ashram and getting our own place outside, nearby the farming community, but outside. So, the years went by, the movement changed. We never really, even though Srila Prabhupada wasn't physically present amongst us, it was never like he was gone. He was always the central figure. And it was actually like one felt closer to him even. In his physical absence, it was like he manifested more directly in our hearts. That was the experience of many. So Srila Prabhupada was always prominent. At the same time, it's been well known and well documented that many things happened which Srila Prabhupada would not have liked and not have approved of. So we lived through all those periods which caused trauma and heartbreak and hassles and disturbances for many. At the same time, it was like a dual experience, because we were pioneering and living the emergence of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission in the world. And it was making its presence felt, and it was growing despite all these challenges and odds. And it was wonderful. It was always wonderful, and there were always highlights like festivals, and I never lost my taste. I did lose my taste for Mangalati, but not for many years. And it reached a point where I remember I noticed in myself that I would never miss Mangalati, but I noticed that I realized I'm only coming because I don't want to be seen as somebody who's not a good devotee. I don't want to be seen as somebody who's slack and doesn't follow the process. So, and I realized, well, that feeling, which was actually pratishta, right? It's actually desire to look good. That kept me going. That kept me going on until finally we moved off the property, and we eventually got our own house, and we continued living because a school had developed, a Gurukul school had developed at New Varshan. It's called New Varshan, and the Auckland community. And my children, I had 3 children, and all 3 of them were in the Gurukul by this stage. And most of the people who had children were not living on the farm anymore. We're now well into the 80s. And by 1990, my husband and I and our kids, we bought our own house, not far away, but we didn't come to the temple so much anymore. We only came for Sunday feasts. And we made our own house a temple. We got Gauratai deities, we had our own beautiful altar. We used to have our daily programs and sadhan practice right there, all under the one roof. We'd been trained up. We'd been living in the ashram for 13 or more years, and Srila Prabhupada was our centre. We had our own set of Bhagavatams, and we studied the Gita every day, and we never stopped chanting our 16 rounds a day. And then eventually we started a prasadam distribution business in Auckland, specialising in vegetable samosas. And I travelled. We worked this business for nearly 10 years. I was hoping to become economically established with this business, but that didn't happen. I think that, you can say it wasn't our karma. Sure, it wasn't. At the same time, I think that we were not smart enough business people. So I used to drive all over Auckland every single day, 5 days a week, every single weekday, with a load of hot samosas. I would have a samosa run, like ladies used to have their bun runs, remember? I had a samosa run, and there were about 20 different suburbs of Auckland that I would visit each month. Once a month they'd see me. And I had customers who would expect me to come on that one day a month. And I would always sell dozens and dozens of samosas. They were $3 each. So in this way I would make money. And also we supplied many cafes and delis and restaurants and health food shops and catering businesses with our samosas. So we were busy and we employed staff, and at the end of 10 years, not $1 richer, but it had maintained us. It had paid a mortgage of a house, it had given our kids an unorthodox education, it had paid for travel for them, it had paid for adult courses which they attended throughout their teenage, and it had kept our vehicles running and us eating well. But not $1 to save. So that was my karma. Anyway, at this stage, a group of devotees wanted to go rural. We wanted, again, to follow Srila Prabhupada's directive and establish our own, private grihasta community of devotees living on the land. So about half a dozen families purchased a block of land in the Kaimai Ranges in the Bay of Plenty, in an area between the district called Katikati and the city of Tauranga, which is the 6th biggest city in New Zealand. So we purchased this lovely block of hilly land with its own water, and there we established a homestead. And in this time, not long after we moved there in 2002, we came across Srila Narayan Goswami Maharaj, and I went along to visit him because when he visited Auckland, because at this time I was really feeling the need for some advanced association and direction. It had been 25 years since Srila Prabhupada disappeared, and I felt like my spiritual life was on a plateau. I was doing everything. I was doing my japa every day. I had my own little morning program going, and everything was going on. But it was more like because I felt obliged to do it. I had given Srila Prabhupada a promise that I would do it, and I didn't want to break that promise. And at the same time, I was thinking, I was remembering that feeling of spontaneous taste that had been there in those first few years with Srila Prabhupada, and clearly noticing that was missing. And I felt I needed an injection of enthusiasm into my bhakti life. And I just had the feeling that maybe Srila Narayan Goswami Maharaj could help me in that way. I had no idea that I was going to become his follower, but I was just going along to hear him as one might go along to hear any advanced devotee speak. And of course, he stole my heart, and I became his overnight. And that gave me another level of injection of that same enthusiasm that we felt when we were young. And Srila Prabhupada had injected us with so much enthusiasm for our bhakti life. So there came my second injection of enthusiasm in bhakti, and it certainly did enliven me beyond what I could have imagined. There is so much to tell, and we'll cover this in a future episode. Hare Krishna, Radhe Radhe.